So, to get the show on the road, our first speaker today, I'd like to welcome Peter Sikkema. You heard him yesterday. Some of you did anyways. Peter recently retired after 36 years at the University of Guelph, Ridgetown campus, where he focused on weed management in field crops. Peter taught several courses, including applied weed science and herbicide biochemistry and physiology. Peter has published more than 445 peer-reviewed manuscripts. Peter is a source of practical solutions for farmers and readily shares his knowledge with primary producers. Peter has presented the results from his research at hundreds of grower meetings, scientific conferences across Canada, the United States, and globally. Peter, the stage is yours. There you are.
Well, thank you very much. In my presentation this morning, I'd like to share with you 8 observations from 30 years of field research on weed management in corn and soybean. The first observation that I'd like to share with you is that there can be a dramatic corn and soybean yield loss due to weed interference. I happen to be a member of the Weed Science Society of America, and I don't ever remember volunteering to serve on the yield loss committee, and I don't ever remember being asked to serve on that committee. Anyways, I noticed that my name was on the committee, and I went to the first committee meeting, and we were asked to document what the yield loss was in the various crops that we were doing research on. This bar graph that you see on the screen at the front of the room represents more than 100 field studies in Ontario. And our data says that if Ontario farmers don't implement any weed management tactics on their farm, there would be a yield loss of 50%. And I think it's fair to assume that it would be similar in the maritime provinces. Soybean is a more competitive crop than corn is, and our data says that if Ontario farmers didn't implement any weed management tactics on their farm, there would be a yield loss of 35%. So I went to the Atlantic Grains Council website, and based on their website, there's about $47.3 million worth of corn produced annually in the maritime provinces. In the maritime provinces, assuming a similar yield loss to Ontario, there would be a farm gate loss of $23.7 million annually. Soybeans are worth $39 million in the maritime provinces, assuming a yield loss of 35%. There would be a loss of $14 million annually. And if maritime farmers didn't implement any weed management tactics in both corn and soybean, there would be a financial loss of $38 million each year. So corn and soybean are very sensitive to weed interference. In our trials, the average and range in yield loss was in corn, as I mentioned earlier, the average yield loss was 50%, and it ranged from 16 to 98%. In soybean, the average was 35%, and the range was 0 to 88%. So the actual yield loss varies from year to year and field to field, and that is influenced by, and I think the single most important determining factor in terms of what the yield loss will be on your farm is the relative time of crop and weed emergence. If the weeds come up before the crop in a no-till situation, they will have a far greater impact on crop yield than if you plant your corn on May 1, it comes up on May 15, and the weeds don't come up till June 1. Those weeds that emerge after the crop has emerged have a far less impact on crop yield. It is going to be influenced by weed species composition. Generally speaking, broadleaf weeds have a greater impact on crop yield than annual grasses. It is influenced by weed density, and it's going to be influenced by weather. In a dry year, there simply isn't enough moisture for both the crop and the weeds, and you'll have a greater yield loss in a dry year. The second observation that I'd like to share with you is that there can be a dramatic yield and monetary loss from delayed herbicide application with post-emergence only weed control programs. So I took this picture in a farmer's field in Ontario. Obviously, I stopped my vehicle, got out and took a picture, and I just said to myself, this farmer has left an awful lot of money on the table due to delayed herbicide application. So we've done a number of trials looking at the impact of time of weed removal on corn yield. So let's say you plant your corn on April 30th, it comes up on May 14, and you don't apply a herbicide till May 21. So that's only 7 days after corn emergence. Your corn is only 1 inch tall, and our data says that you would have lost 4 bushels per acre, or you're losing 0.6 bushels per acre per day as you delay the herbicide application. And not surprisingly, the yield loss accelerates. And if you delay the application from 7 days after corn emergence to 28 days, you're losing 1.7 bushels per acre per day by delaying the application after 7 days after corn emergence. Or if you want to look at it on a weekly basis, if you plan to spray your corn, let's say on Tuesday of 1 week, and you got busy with other things on the farm, and you delayed it by 7 days, our data says you would have lost 12 bushels by delaying the application of your herbicide from Tuesday of 1 week to 7 days later. I grew up on a dairy and hog farm. My dad had his own sprayer when I was growing up on the farm, and my dad would say, well, it's about time to spray the corn, right, for weed management. But if we got busy baling hay, we didn't even blink in terms of delaying it by a week. I am sure most farmers don't appreciate that they're losing 12 bushels by delaying the application by 7 days. Another way we can look at it is just the monetary loss. So our data says that assuming that corn sells for $6.56 a bushel, that is the 5-year average in Ontario, our data says that if you delay the application till 7 days after corn emergence, you would have lost $29 per acre, or you're losing $4 per acre for every day that you delay the herbicide application. And then just like I showed you with the yield loss, the monetary loss accelerates. And between 7 and 28 days after corn emergence, you're losing $11 per acre per day. So if you had planned to spray your corn on Monday, and for whatever reason it got delayed till Tuesday morning, you've lost $11 per acre due to weed interference. And if you look at it on a weekly basis from 7 days after corn emergence till 28 days, you're losing $76 per acre by delaying herbicide application by 1 week. So let's just make the assumption that you have 250 acres of corn. The price of corn is $6.56 per bushel. The seeding date of your corn was April 30th, and the corn came up 2 weeks later on May 14. If you delay your first herbicide application till May 21, you would have lost 4.4 bushels per acre, or $29 per acre. And on your 250 acre corn crop, you would have lost $7,200. If you delay the application till 14 days after corn emergence on May 28, you would have lost 14.6 bushels per acre, or $96 per acre, and $23,900 on your 250 acre corn crop. If you delay it till June 4th, or 21 days after corn emergence, the yield loss would be 26.6 bushels per acre, or $186 per acre, and you would have lost $47,000. And if you delay it till June 1, 28 days after June 11, after corn emergence, you would have lost 39 bushels per acre, a value of $257 per acre, or $64,000 on your 250-acre corn crop. So I took this picture just last summer, so 2024. It happens to be halfway between our house and my daughter's house. I did retire. She lives about 20 minutes from our place, and so I frequently am bringing our grandchildren back home to their house at the end of the day. And I would ask you, and don't answer my question, I'm going to ask you the rhetorical question, is this excellent weed management? Would you be happy with this on your farm? And I took a picture 2 weeks earlier in the exact same spot, and I had stopped my car, and this is what the field looked like. And this is the summer of 2024, and I said to myself, man, that guy lost a lot of money due to weed interference. I'm going to estimate that the weeds were 4 inches in height at the time of application. Our data says that if weeds are 4 inches high, you'd have lost 17.4 bushels per acre. That would be a monetary loss of $114 per acre. And if you have 250 acres of corn, you've lost $28,500, and the weed control's perfect, right? When I took that second picture. And so the time of weed management is just critical in maximizing farm profitability. So there is a temptation to delay herbicide application or glyphosate until all the weeds have emerged. If you're going to make a mistake as a grower, always make the mistake of spraying too early rather than too late. If you spray too late, you've already lost money due to weed interference. If you did spray too early, you can correct that with a subsequent herbicide application. So early herbicide application results in improved weed control. You have a reduced length of weed interference and an increase in corn yield. And the optimal application timing is year and field specific, and I want to acknowledge that. And so every field's different, and in our trials, the appropriate application timing ranged from VC to V6, or from the 1-leaf to 8-leaf stage of corn. And now I'll go on to soybean. There can be a dramatic yield and monetary loss from delayed herbicide application, with post-emergence only weed control programs in soybean, depending on weed pressure. Here I am going to present the information in a very different way. Rather than days after crop emergence, I'm going to look at the impact of weed size at the time of application. So in soybean, our data says that if you allow your weeds to get 2 inches in height, you would have lost 2 bushels per acre, or you're losing 1 bushel for every 1 inch in weed height, right? And then just like in corn, the yield loss accelerates as the weeds get bigger. And between 2 and 8 inches in height, you're losing 2 bushels per acre for each additional 1 inch in weed height. So once again, looking at that in terms of the monetary loss, and truth be told, I got up early this morning and I changed my slides because the price of soybean has gone down so dramatically, and I didn't want to overestimate what was happening. And so I went to the website, and the projected price of soybean in the fourth quarter of 2025 in Chatham, Ontario is $13.97. So that's way less than the $15.60 that I had in my presentation only a few hours ago. Anyways, based on that revised price of soybean, if you allow your soybean or your weeds to be 2 inches in height at the time of your first herbicide application, you're losing $13 per acre for every 1 inch in weed height. And then the monetary loss accelerates, and between 2 and 8 inches in height, you're losing $21 per acre for each additional 1 inch in weed height. So if we assume you have 250 acres of soybean, the price is $13.97, and I got that off of the web just recently, so it's $13.97 per bushel for fourth quarter 2025. So if you allow your weeds to be 2 inches in height, our data says you would have lost 1.8 bushels per acre, or $25, and on your 250 acre soybean crop, you would have lost $6,000. If you allow the weeds to be 4 inches in height, you would have lost 5 bushels per acre, or $71, and a farm value of $18,000. If you allow the weeds to be 6 inches in height, you would lose 8 bushels per acre for a loss of $116 per acre and $29,000 on your 250 acre crop. And if you allow the weeds to be 8 inches in height, you lose 11 bushels, $153 per acre, or $38,000 on your farm. So soybean, and I want to stress this, they can tolerate early weed interference better than corn, but there can be a rapid decline in soybean yield due to weed interference. So the question is why are farmers relying on total post-emergence weed control programs? And you can see that I got this old advertisement. It's 1996, 30 years ago. It was published by Monsanto Agricultural Group. In 1996, they introduced Roundup Ready soybean. In the United States, it was 1997 in Canada. And this is what Monsanto recommended 30 years ago. And they said there is no need for residual herbicides in the Roundup Ready soybean system. And they went on to say that tank mixes with other post-emergent soybean products are not recommended. So Monsanto 30 years ago was recommending that you only spray glyphosate, you only spray it post-emergence, and you don't use any other herbicides in your weed control program. And unfortunately, across North America, many farmers adopted those recommendations. So my question to you is, what should farmers do? And after 35 years of field research in corn and soybean, this is my line: you start clean. You want corn and soybeans to come up in a completely weed-free environment, and you want them to keep them clean through the critical weed-free period. And I will go on to say the undocumented corn and soybean yield loss across Canada from post-emergence only weed control programs is tremendous. So let's say in Ontario, you got 187 bushels per acre, right? Most farmers are going to be satisfied with 187 bushels per acre. You know what? Because they relied on a total post-emergence weed control program, the yield potential could have easily been over 200 bushels per acre. And nobody can tell you what that undocumented yield and monetary loss across Canada is, because farmers rely on total post-emergence weed control programs. So I've landed on, after many years of research, that a two-pass weed control program, and what I mean by that is an effective soil-applied herbicide followed by a post-emergence herbicide in corn and soybean, frequently results in improved weed control, higher yield, and greater net returns. So here we looked at the Monsanto recommendations. It was one application of glyphosate. EP stands for early post-emergence. LP stands for late post-emergence, and we compared that to a 2-pass program of a soil-applied herbicide followed by Roundup applied late post-emergence. And you can see we had much better weed control where we included the soil-applied herbicide in our weed control program. So we took those trials to yield, and I want to stress this is a pretty robust data set. It's the average yield of 10 experiments conducted at both Ridgetown and Exeter, Ontario. In the weedy check, there was 98 bushels per acre. Roundup applied early post and late post, really interesting in this research, resulted in the exact same yield. However, where we put on a soil-applied herbicide followed by Roundup late post, you can see the yield was 208 bushels per acre, and it was equivalent to the weed-free check. So just to conclude, the weed control was lower with 1 pass of Roundup. It was 77%. With the Roundup applied early post, 86 applied late post, and the best weed control was with a 2-pass weed control program of a soil-applied herbicide, followed by Roundup applied late post-emergence. Corn yield was lower with 1 application of Roundup. It was 195 bushels per acre. And the highest corn yield and gross return were with the 2-pass program, 208 bushels per acre, and you're making $85 more per acre by including that soil-applied herbicide. So in summary, the soil-applied herbicide followed by Roundup applied post-emergence is recommended. This will minimize corn yield loss from weed interference. It opens the window for Roundup applied post-emergence, and you will get better activity out of Roundup when you apply it post-emergence after a soil-applied herbicide. And there's 2 reasons for that. Every post-emergence herbicide performs better in a low-density environment than it does in a high-density environment. And you get better activity out of Roundup because the weeds present at the time of application are now smaller, and every post-emergence herbicide works better on small weeds than it does on big weeds. So the second summary comment I would make is the soil-applied herbicide followed by Roundup applied post-emergence provides insurance for seasons when the application of Roundup applied post is delayed due to multiple rain events. It could be windy conditions, it could be large acreages or equipment breakdowns. I mentioned yesterday that my brother and nephew still farm where I grew up. When I was a child, my dad had his own sprayer. Sprayers cost too much. They have 300 acres, 100 dairy cows, and so they get with the local ag retailer to spray their crops. They called their local ag retailer to spray their corn. Guess what? It took them 2 weeks to get to their farm. And it wasn't that the ag retailer was bad. There was multiple rain events. It could have been windy, could have been equipment breakdowns. It took them 2 weeks, and I just think, how much money did my brother lose due to delayed application of that herbicide? So the ideal soil-applied herbicide is field-specific. You shouldn't use the same one on every field. It is going to be determined by weed species composition. It will be influenced by soil characteristics such as soil texture, organic matter, cation exchange capacity, and pH. And it will be influenced by future crops in the rotation. If you have sensitive crops in the rotation, you will have to be careful in terms of what soil-applied herbicide you use. And finally, I will say that the use of a soil-applied herbicide followed by a post-emergence herbicide ensures the use of multiple herbicide modes of action, which reduces weed seed return to the soil. If you want to make weed control easier on your farm next year, do a good job this year and reduce the amount of weed seeds that are returned to the soil. Weed density always impacts herbicide efficacy. And the second thing, the benefit of using multiple herbicide modes of action, it's going to reduce the selection pressure for the evolution of herbicide-resistant weed biotypes. The fifth observation that I'd like to share with you is sometimes adjuvants can have a dramatic effect on weed control, crop yield, and net returns. So this is some research where we looked at a number of different adjuvants with the herbicide Select. So here's Select applied without an adjuvant, provided 16% control of volunteer corn. And you add an adjuvant, and let's say the adjuvant cost you $3 an acre, and you go from 16% control to 91% with the addition of Amigo, and that is the adjuvant that is on the Select label. And some newer adjuvants that are being evaluated. You can see there's Journey and Strike Lock, and the control was statistically equivalent at 94 and 95%. If you look at the pictures on the right-hand side, here's the weedy control where no herbicide was applied. This is Select without an adjuvant, really disappointing. You add $3 worth of an adjuvant, and you would have thought you had a different herbicide in the tank. So in terms of the benefit of the addition of the adjuvant, there was an improvement in volunteer corn control of 75 to 79%. Really interesting to me, and not what you would have expected. Even though Select only provided 16% control of the volunteer corn, there was still a 7 bushel per acre yield increase. And notice that there was a further 7 to 9 bushel per acre yield increase in soybean by adding a $3 adjuvant. So the addition of an adjuvant to Select improved volunteer control by greater than 75%. It increased soybean yield an average of 8 bushels per acre. Assuming a soybean price of $13.97 and the cost of the adjuvant was $3, the addition of the adjuvant increased gross returns by $112 per acre, and there was a $37 return for every $1 invested in the adjuvant, and the return on investment was 3,725%. And so just to put this in perspective, I left industry in 1988. I worked for 3 of the agricultural products companies before I went to Ridgetown campus. When I left industry, I had to put in my pension contributions into a locked-in RRSP. The last 5 years, Peter Sycamore, with his money managed by an expert at the local bank in Ridgetown, Ontario, got 4%. Farmers get 3,725% on their investment in an adjuvant. Man, follow the label, they're really important. So my sixth observation that I'd make is that the most common annual grass escape in Roundup Ready soybean is, and it is, a volunteer crop, right? Volunteer Roundup Ready corn. I would have never predicted when Roundup Ready soybean got registered in 1997, Roundup Ready corn was introduced in 2001, that the #1 annual grass escape in Roundup Ready soybean would be a volunteer crop. And it is the #1 weed escape in soybean, #1 annual grass escape in soybean in Ontario. And it makes perfect sense, right? Roundup takes out every other annual grass, and the only one that's left is the volunteer Roundup Ready corn, which has the gene that confers resistance to glyphosate. So because that became the #1 annual grass problem in the province in soybean, we looked at the various herbicides that you could use for the control of volunteer corn. And this is a long story, and it becomes rather circuitous as I go through it. But initially, the best herbicide to control volunteer corn in Roundup Ready soybean was Assure. And you can see that Post provided 78% control, Select 84, Venture 89, and Assure was 93%. And just to show you what it looked like in our trials, here you can see where we did the research. In the background happens to be the weedy check. In the foreground is where Assure was applied, and it became the #1 grass herbicide for the control of volunteer corn in soybean. However, about 8 years ago, Extend soybean were introduced into the market. And this is some research that was done by Matt Underwood while he was a graduate student in my program. In Matt's research, you can see that Assure at 100 milliliters per acre provided 85% control. Really interesting, the addition of dicamba to Assure antagonizes the activity of the Assure for volunteer corn control. And you can see there was a 27% decrease in volunteer corn control by adding dicamba to the tank. And the explanation for that is really straightforward. The dicamba-based herbicides upregulate cytochrome P450 enzymes. Those enzymes, which are upregulated by the application of dicamba, break down Assure, and you get reduced control of volunteer corn by adding dicamba to the tank. So the question is what should a farmer, I'm one slide ahead of myself. So here you can see the control with Assure by itself. That's the impact of adding dicamba to the tank and the dramatically reduced control of volunteer corn. So I got a 2025 herbicide price list, so this is completely up to date. Assure at 100 milliliters per acre, it costs you $4.37, really cost effective. And so the question is what should a farmer do to overcome that antagonism? By adding $1.20 of Assure, you can almost overcome all of the antagonism. And by adding $2.40 more of Assure, now you're looking at 150 milliliters per acre instead of 100. You can overcome that antagonism. But now, just recently, we have E3 soybean, and dicamba and 2,4-D both antagonize Assure for the exact reason that I gave you earlier. They upregulate enzymes that metabolize Assure. And in this research that was completed by Emily Dunk while she was a graduate student in my program, you can see that the addition of dicamba was even more severe than in Matt's research, and there was an 81% decrease in volunteer corn control, and 2,4-D does the exact same thing, right? And you can see that in list 1, there was an 80% reduction in the control of the volunteer corn. So similarly, looking at another Group 1 herbicide, Select, dicamba and 2,4-D antagonize Select. You can see that Select provided 81% control, where there was no tank mix partner. The addition of Extendamax reduced the control by 36% to 45%, and the addition of 2,4-D reduced the control by 23%. And in terms of volunteer and list corn, really interesting, Assure and Venture do not control volunteer and list corn. So if you choose to grow enlist corn this year, and then you have volunteer enlist corn in your soybean next year, I just showed you that Assure and Venture were the best for controlling volunteer corn, and they provide absolutely no control of volunteer enlist corn at all. So this is research that was conducted by Matt Underwood. And here you can see the volunteer enlist corn. He applied Assure. He gave 100 or close to 100% control of volunteer corn in previous studies, and it's 0. And you can see 0 control with Venture. And the Post and Select provide quite good control. And so Assure and Venture belong to a herbicide family called the aryloxy-phenoxypropionates. And the enzyme that is in enlist corn cleaves Assure and Venture, and they no longer work. Because Post and Select are in a different herbicide family, they are the cyclohexane diones, they're still effective. So the question is why do Assure and Venture fail on enlist corn? And really interesting, the enzyme that was put into enlist corn, it's called aryloxyalkanoate deoxygenase, and that enzyme cleaves the 2,4-D molecule adjacent to the oxygen on the phenoxy ring. It adds a hydrogen atom, producing a dichlorophenol. So I'm sure, once again, like I said yesterday, you're probably having conniptions thinking about your grade 12 chemistry, but this is what this enzyme does. You look at the red line, it just splits the 2,4-D molecule where the red line is, and the reason why you can apply enlist or 2,4-D on enlist soybean is 2,4-D is no longer active. It splits the enzyme and it's no longer phytotoxic, and that's why you can apply it to your E3 soybean. So that enzyme cleaves the 2,4-D molecule. Really interesting, this exact enzyme also cleaves Venture and Assure, and it's because all 3 of these herbicides have a phenoxy ring. A phenoxy ring is just your benzene ring here with an oxygen attached, and it cleaves it right at this point in that chemical structure. And notice that Venture and Assure both have a phenoxy ring or a phenyl ring, benzene ring with an oxygen attached. And just like it does to 2,4-D, it cleaves the Venture molecule and it cleaves the Assure molecule. And that's why they provide 0% control of volunteer enlist corn. It all comes down to chemistry. I said it to you yesterday, I am fascinated by the interaction between chemistry and biological performance in the field. So the 7th observation that I will share with you is that the addition of ammonium sulfate to Liberty improves the control of some weed species. So this is research that was done by Emily Dunk while she was a graduate student in my program. And if you have common ragweed, wild mustard, redroot pigweed, green foxtail, barnyard grass on your farm, there is no value of adding ammonium sulfate to Liberty, and the improvement in control was plus or minus 4%. You wouldn't bother buying the ammonium sulfate. In contrast to that, there's a 9% improvement in the control of lamb's quarters with the addition of ammonium sulfate, and there's a 34% improvement in the control of velvet leaf. So whether or not you should add ammonium sulfate to Liberty is totally dependent on the weed spectrum in each individual field. And our data would say if you have lamb's quarters or velvet leaf, you're going to get a return on your investment in ammonium sulfate. And if you have these other weeds, save your money. You're not going to get much improvement in weed control. So the addition of ammonium sulfate to Liberty improves the control of lamb's quarters and velvet leaf. And so in conclusion, I would like to thank all the groups that have supported my research program over the last 36 years. I would like to thank Grain Farmers of Ontario, just like the Atlantic Grain Council. They have a checkoff, and they have been generous supporters of my weed control program over the years. I would like to thank the agricultural products companies. They have contributed a lot to my research program, as well as federal and provincial programs. I'd like to thank the research technicians that have worked with me over the years, the graduate students, summer research assistants. I simply wouldn't have this data to share with you this morning if it wasn't for their hard work. But I said I would share 8 observations with you, and I think this is really important. And that is, a perfectly clean field at harvest does not necessarily equal optimal crop/weed management. Always remember that. Anyways, here you have 2 plots. They are in my research program. Let's assume they're 2 neighboring farmers. I call them Farmer A and Farmer B. Let's say they're right beside each other. There's no windbreak. There's no fence line between their 2 fields. And you drive by in your pickup truck, and I think all of you would conclude that Farmer A and Farmer B are really good farmers, right? They have perfect weed control just prior to corn maturing. And all I'll say is looks can be deceptive, right? And so in the picture on the left-hand side, it was a 2-pass weed control program. In this study, we had 203 bushels per acre. The picture on the right, we relied on a total post-emergence weed control program. In this study, there was a 16 bushel per acre yield loss. You lost $105 per acre due to weed interference, and both fields look perfectly clean at harvest time. And it isn't what your weed control is at harvest time that's the most important thing. The most important thing in weed management is time of weed management, and it is those early emerging weeds that have the greatest impact on crop yield. So I say the goal of weed management in corn and soybean should be to start clean and stay clean through the critical weed-free period. I think you will maximize farm profitability by using that weed control program. So thank you very much. I did take 2 observations out of my presentation this morning. I had 10, and now I'm done early in contrast to yesterday. But anyways, I'd be more than happy to try to address any questions that you have. Yeah, Alan?
Can you, for soybeans, use corn as the example, but in soybeans, what would be some options of 2-pass?
Yep. Yeah, so there's a lot of different options that you can use. Oh, sorry. So the question is what would be some of the soil-applied options that you can use in soybean as well as corn? So I'll answer corn. I mean, some options that you may consider in corn, it could be something like Prime Extra, it could be Acuron, it could be Converge, Corvus, Integrity. And I think all of those would have a place in terms of a 2-pass weed control program in corn. And similarly in soybean, there are lots of different options. So you could use Boundary, Bifecta, you could use Fierce, there's Triactor, and I'm sure I'm missing a few, Optil, Integrity. They're all soil-applied herbicides in soybean. And once again, I think it's really important that you match the herbicide to the weed spectrum in each individual field. And so Eric Richter's there from Syngenta, and I'll pick on a Syngenta herbicide. If you have really heavy common ragweed and velvet leaf pressure, I mean, probably Boundary isn't your soil-applied herbicide of choice because they're not really that good on those weeds. And you would select your herbicide based on historical records of the weed species composition in each individual field. And it's the exact same thing in corn. You have to know which weeds are in each individual field from historical records, and that will determine what's the best soil-applied herbicide to use. Anyone else? If not, thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Peter. We always hear the importance of properly applied herbicides, but it's nice to see the numbers attached to it. Nothing brings reality to the show when you actually see how much money you do lose when you don't do things right.